and welcome to the topic Approach to Thrombophilia in the Hematology module. By the end of this topic, you should be able to define thrombophilia, explain the pathophysiology of the disease, outline the causes of thrombophilia, describe the clinical manifestations of thrombophilia, outline the investigations to ascertain the diagnosis, and discuss the management approach. Let's get started. Thrombophilia is defined as an abnormality of blood coagulation that increases the risk of thrombosis, which is the tendency of the blood clotting in blood vessels. Thromb refers to the word thrombus, and philia refers to the meaning abnormal liking or tendency. So thrombophilia is the abnormality of the blood where there is an increased tendency of clotting. Normal pathophysiology of coagulation cascade starts with endothelial injury, where a blood vessel is severed or injured. Blood and blood components such as erythrocytes and white cells are leaking out of the breaks. Next, vascular spasms ensues. Smooth muscle in the vessel wall contracts at the injury point to reduce the blood loss. Platelet plugs are then formed. Platelets are activated by chemicals released from the injury site and by contact with underlying collagen. The platelets become spiked and stick with each other and the wound site. Finally, coagulation cascades are activated. In coagulation, fibrinogen is converted to fibrin, which forms a mesh that traps more platelets and erythrocytes, producing a clot. Fibrin strands secure platelets and erythrocytes, effectively plugging the break. The detailed coagulation cascade will be explained in the next slide. The intrinsic pathway consists of factors 1, 2, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Respectively, each one is named fibrinogen, prothrombin, Christmas factor, Stewart-Prower factor, plasma thromboplastin, and Hageman factor. The extrinsic pathway consists of factors 1, 2, 7, and 10. Factor 7 is called stable factor. The common pathway consists of factors 1, 2, 5, 8, and 10. This intrinsic pathway is the longer pathway of secondary hemostasis. It begins with the activation of factor 12, a zymogen inactivated serum protease, which becomes factor 12A after exposure to endothelial collagen. Endothelial collagen is only exposed when endothelial damage occurs. Factor 12A acts as a catalyst to activate factor 11 to factor 11A. Factor 11A then goes on to activate factor 9 to factor 9A. Factor 9A goes on to serve as a catalyst for turning factor 10 to factor 10A, and this is known as a cascade. When each factor is activated, it goes on to activate many more factors in the next steps. As it moves further down the cascade, the concentration of that factor increases in the blood. For example, the concentration of factor 9 is more than the concentration of factor 11. When factor 2 is activated by extrinsic and intrinsic pathway, it can reinforce the intrinsic pathway by giving positive feedback to factors 5, 7, 8, 11, and 12. And this makes factor 12 less critical. Patients can actually clot well without factor 12. The intrinsic pathway is clinically measured by the partial thromboplastin time or PTT. The extrinsic pathway is the shorter pathway of secondary hemostasis, and once the damage of the vessel is done, the endothelial cells release tissue factors, which goes on to activate factor 7 to 7A. Factor 7A goes on to activate factor 10 into factor 10A. This is the point where both extrinsic and intrinsic pathways become one. The extrinsic pathway is clinically measured as the prothrombin time or PT. The common pathway begins at factor 10, which is activated to factor 10A. The process of activating factor 10A is a complicated reaction. Denase is the complex that cleaves factor 10 into factor 10A. Denase has two forms: extrinsic, which is consisting of factor 7, factor 3, and calcium, or intrinsic, which is made up of cofactor 8, factor 9A, and phospholipid as well as calcium. Thrombin also goes on to activate other factors in the intrinsic pathway, as well as cofactors 5 and factor 8, as well as factor 13. Fibrin subunits come together to form fibrin strands, and factor 13 acts on fibrin strands to form a fibrin mesh. This mesh helps to stabilize the platelet plug. Next, let's understand how thrombophilia is caused. The triad of hypercoagulability, vascular stasis, and vascular trauma, or Virchow's triad, is accountable for vascular thrombosis. A hypercoagulable state and subsequent thromboembolism is a result of overactivity of procoagulant factors or deficiencies in anticoagulants. Here are some examples of causes and how it leads to thrombophilia. Firstly, antithrombin 3 deficiency where antithrombin 3 binds to heparin on endothelial cells and forms a complex with thrombin and thus inhibiting coagulation. Next, malignancy that leads to prothrombic states, though through the production of procoagulant factors such as tissue factor and cancer procoagulant and the interaction of tumor cells with blood and vascular endothelium. Nicotine also results in endothelial damage. The release of tissue plasminogen activator gets reduced and the carbon monoxide increases the permeability of endothelium to lipids, thus leading to atheroma formation. Lastly, trauma causes procoagulant disbalance. It's more pronounced during the first 24 hours during injury and more so in women. On the other hand, thrombophilia can also be hereditary or acquired. Hereditary thrombophilia are genetic mutations that affect the amount of or function of a protein in the coagulation system. There is a loss of function mutations including those affecting antithrombin, protein C and protein S, and gain of function mutations including factor V Leiden and prothrombin gene mutations. As for acquired thrombophilia, they are caused by antiphospholipid syndrome, deficiencies in the natural anticoagulants, activated protein C resistance in the absence of factor V Leiden, and certain diseases such as myeloproliferative neoplasms, paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, and cancer. Some medications increase thrombosis risk, including exogenous hormones and chemotherapy. Acquired habits such as smoking, obesity, increasing age, and pregnancy. Hereditary thrombophilia should be suspected in patients with a history of any of the following, such as recurrent venous thromboembolism, venous thrombosis before the age of 40, a family history of venous thromboembolism, thrombosis in unusual sites such as mesenteric vein, renal vein, hepatic vein, or cerebral thrombosis. Clinical criteria for indicating the presence of lupus anticoagulants is the Sapporo criteria for the antiphospholipid syndrome, and its are as follows. One or more episodes of arterial, venous, or small vessel thrombosis affecting any organ or tissue, pregnancy morbidity where the risk of maternal and fetal morbidity increases after the 10th week of pregnancy, 3 or more unexplained consecutive spontaneous abortion after the 10th week of gestation. Now, we will discuss investigations that can be done. You want to do a full blood count for the evidence of polycythemia vera, essential thrombocythemia, and heparin-induced thrombocythemia. Next, examination of the peripheral smear for evidence of schistiocytes can be done, and this is to rule out DIVC or TTP as well as hemolytic uremic syndrome. Leukoerythroblastic pictures suggest involvement of bone marrow by tumor. And then you can also perform a liver and renal function test as well as an urine analysis for patients with Budd-Chiari syndrome and nephrotic syndrome respectively. You can carry out coagulation tests including PT, APTT, and thromboplastin time and fibrinogen for evidence of lupus anticoagulants or other acquired coagulation disorders. Stepwise approach related to assays and assay methods for individual risk factors including thrombophilia investigations. Moving on, the image attached here is the immunochemical assay that can be carried out. Here, let's discuss the principles of management of thrombophilia. So basically, there's no specific treatment for thrombophilia unless it is causing a problem and it is caused by an underlying medical illness such as nephrotic syndrome, and the treatment of the underlying disease is needed. As for symptomatic treatment, substitution of coagulation factors can achieve causal treatment. For example, antithrombin 3 can be substituted in inherited or acquired deficiencies. FFP, which is fresh frozen plasma, containing the natural balance of procoagulants and anticoagulant factors can be given. Different anticoagulants and antiplatelets are available to prevent recurrent venous thromboembolism. They include vitamin K antagonists such as warfarin, aspirin, rivaroxaban, dabigatran, and apixaban. Additionally, considerations are prudent regarding special populations. The CLOT trial assessed low molecular weight heparin against warfarin in cancer patients. Heparin did show teratogenicity and is FDA approved during pregnancy and postpartum period. Prevention of thrombotic events include compression stockings and mobility. Rosuvastatin prevents the occurrence of venous thromboembolisms as well. In summary, hypercoagulability describes the pathologic state of exaggerated coagulation or coagulation in the absence of bleeding. A hypercoagulable state and subsequent thromboembolism is a result of overactivity of procoagulant factors or deficiency in anticoagulants. Congenital thrombophilia refers to inborn conditions that increase the tendency to develop thrombosis, while acquired thrombophilia refers to the conditions that arise later in life. Thrombophilia usually manifests as deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. Tests for thrombophilia include a full blood count, coagulation profile, a wide assay to determine the cause of thrombophilia. There is no specific treatment for thrombophilia, but recurrent episodes of thrombosis may be an indication for long-term preventive anticoagulation. We have come to the end of this topic. Thank you.